Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about an interesting moment in U.S. politics. President Trump is really kicking off his second term with a whole bunch of executive orders over 50
Yeah, it's a very bold start. And you know what's even more interesting is he's actually decided to sign several of these publicly
at the Capitol.
at the Capitol,
Yeah.
which is not something that's often done.
It's a big statement for sure.
Yeah, it's a signal of intent right from the beginning, and I think it's going to have a big impact on, all of us.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the biggest things we are diving into today is his plan to reclassify thousands of federal jobs. So he's basically aiming to replace career civil servants with political appointees, people who are directly loyal to his administration. What do you think the long-term consequences of a shift like that could be?
Well, when you think about it, you're fundamentally changing the nature of the federal workforce. I mean, the
Right.
civil service was designed to be a system that's based on merit and expertise, right? Not political allegiance. So by shifting to a system that is driven by ideology, it could really impact everything from government programs to public trust,
Yeah, are we talking about like a potential loss of experience and impartiality?
potentially.
If somebody's job security is like tied to them agreeing with a certain ideology, wouldn't that create a conflict of interest?
It's a really valid concern. And historically, if we look back, when we've seen shifts towards ideologically driven systems, we often see this decline in the quality of governance because decisions start to be made based on politics rather than what's best for the public.
Yeah, so that's a big red flag.
Hmm.
And it makes me wonder about some of these other executive orders, the climate funding cut, for example.
Right.
He wants to take money that was already allocated by Congress
Through the Inflation Reduction Act.
through the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
It seems like it's going to be a showdown.
Oh, absolutely. It directly challenges Congress's power.
Yeah.
And I think it really underscores what we're seeing across all of these executive orders is this willingness to test the limits of his presidential authority.
It's like he's saying, like, I won, I'm doing things my way.
Yeah.
But where does that leave the balance of power in our government?
That's the question, isn't it? It's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I think this is something that legal scholars and political analysts are going to be debating for years to come. I think we're in uncharted territory here.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And what it means for our democracy is, I think, a big question mark.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's talk about the issue that's probably causing the most anxiety right now,
Yeah.
immigration. We heard Trump at his pre-inaugural rally
Right.
talking about what he planned to do at the southern border. Listen to that.
Okay.
Audio clip plays. By the time the sun sets tomorrow evening, the invasion of our borders will have come to a halt, and all the illegal border trespassers will, in some form or another, be on their way back home. That invasion rhetoric is pretty intense. It seems like he's trying to create a climate of fear almost.
Yeah, I think it's definitely language meant to evoke a sense of urgency and crisis.
Yeah.
But, it's important to remember that the vast majority of people crossing the border are just looking for asylum or a better life for their families. They're not a threat.
Right, and what are the legal and ethical implications of using that kind of language? But let's actually talk about what this means practically.
Yeah.
What about those plans for mass deportations in Chicago?
Yeah, they were postponed because of leaks.
Right.
But, they really highlight this fear that exists in immigrant communities. Families are living in constant uncertainty.
Yeah.
They're afraid to go to work, afraid to send their kids to school. The mental toll of that is huge.
Absolutely. So who's behind these policies?
Well, the name that keeps coming up is Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
He's the incoming Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy.
Right.
He was really key in shaping immigration policy in Trump's first term.
Okay.
And he's known for having a really hardline stance.
Yep.
He also had some things to say at the rally about federal workers.
Wow.
Let's hear what he had to say. Audio clip plays. Accountability is coming. Justice is coming. The whole federal bureaucracy is about to learn that they don't work for themselves. They work for you. They work for President Trump, and they work for the American people.
Okay, that's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
Accountability is coming. It sounds a little bit like a threat.
Yeah, I think it definitely raises questions about the type of environment he's envisioning for these employees. And it really ties into something that we're going to talk about a bit later, which is this conservative initiative called Project 2025.
Project 2025.
Mm.
That sounds ominous. What is that? So Project 2025,
Yeah.
What is it? It sounds like a movie.
It's like a blueprint, basically, a very detailed plan to completely reshape the government.
Wow.
And the idea is that they want to replace career civil servants with people who are ideologically aligned, with the administration.
It sounds like a pretty big overhaul. I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made for streamlining the bureaucracy. We hear about government waste all the time. Couldn't this make things more efficient?
Yeah, there's definitely a debate to be had about the size and role of government, but the concern with Project 2025 goes beyond just streamlining.
Right.
It's about replacing experience and knowledge with ideology.
So you're saying that instead of experts in their fields making decisions based on, like, evidence,
Exactly.
we could have decisions being made just because of political agendas.
Right, and that raises questions about, what happens then? What are the consequences? For example, if you have somebody in charge of environmental regulations who doesn't even believe in climate change, how's that going to affect our air and water?
That's a scary thought. What about the people who say that the federal workforce is like full of deep state operatives working against the president?
That's a narrative that's gaining some traction. But it's really important to remember that the vast majority of civil servants are dedicated professionals.
Yeah.
They're committed to serving the public regardless of who is president.
Yeah.
They take an oath to the Constitution, not to a party.
So this idea of this deep state is more of a conspiracy theory.
There's really no evidence to support it. And it's harmful because it erodes trust in our institutions.
Yeah, it makes people suspicious of everything.
Exactly.
It seems like distrust is a big theme right now
Absolutely.
in our political climate.
And that's a problem because democracies rely on trust.
Yeah,
When you lose that trust, it becomes very difficult to address problems together.
it's a vicious cycle. So let's get back to immigration. We talked about the deportation plans, which seem legally and ethically problematic. Can you go into more detail about those concerns?
Sure, you have to remember that everyone in this country has due process under the law,
Right.
regardless of their immigration status.
So that means they have the right to a fair hearing?
Exactly, the right to an attorney, the right to appeal a decision.
Mhm.
Mass deportations without those safeguards would really be a violation of their constitutional rights.
So even if someone is undocumented, they still have basic rights.
Absolutely.
They can't be ignored.
Right. That's why many legal experts believe that if these mass deportation plans were actually put into action, they would be challenged in court immediately.
And then it would be up to the courts to decide whether they're constitutional or not.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that highlights another important aspect of all of this.
Right.
The potential for conflict between the different branches of government.
Right. Checks and balances in our system.
Yeah, it's like they're supposed to keep each other in check.
Exactly. So if the president is seen as overstepping his bounds, it's Congress and the courts that are supposed to limit him.
But that only works if there is that willingness to use those checks and balances.
Right.
And there's some concern that with our current political climate, that those checks aren't as strong as they should be.
Yeah. And that's worrying because then you have this potential for the abuse of power, like we were talking about earlier with the example of TikTok.
Right, where he could just ban TikTok through an executive order.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a way to bypass Congress to make big changes with very little oversight.
So are we on a slippery slope here? Where's this all going?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think what's clear is that we are at a turning point.
Yeah.
What happens in the next few years is going to have a massive impact on our democracy.
What about the impact on everyday people? I mean, we talk about the fear for immigrants, but how could all of this affect, like, the average person?
Think about government services.
Oh.
If you have this mass exodus of experienced civil servants, it could mean longer wait times.
Right.
Things become less efficient. The quality of services could go down.
So everything from getting your passport to getting your taxes done could be affected.
Potentially, yeah. It's hard to really overstate how much of a ripple effect these changes could have on our everyday lives.
It's a lot to take in. It's kind of overwhelming. What can we even do?
Yeah.
What can people actually do to make a difference and protect themselves?
I feel like we've talked about a lot of downsides,
Right.
like the potential for losing expertise in government and a chilling effect on free speech. So
Right.
what can people actually do about this stuff? It's easy to feel kind of powerless. It's understandable to feel that way, but I don't think you are powerless. I think you actually have more influence than you might think. And it starts with understanding the issues which you're already doing by listening to this.
So knowledge is the first step.
Yeah, exactly.
But what comes after that? What can people actually do?
Well, there are a lot of ways to get involved. You can support organizations that are fighting for things you believe in, whether that's civil liberties or environmental justice or immigrant rights. There are groups doing amazing work, and even a small donation can really make a difference.
So put your money where your mouth is, basically.
Yeah.
What about engaging with the political process directly?
Yeah, that's huge. Contact your elected officials, both local and national, and let them know what you think about these executive orders. Tell them what you're worried about. Remember, they actually work for you.
Yeah, I think people forget that sometimes. It's easy to feel disconnected from politics, especially when it seems like such a mess.
Yeah.
But you're saying that actually making our voices heard is more important now than ever.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of like your own platform too. Even
No.
just talking to friends and family, raising awareness, having thoughtful discussions that can change minds.
Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world or something like that. But what about people who feel like the system is rigged against them? Like their voice just doesn't matter.
I get that. I hear that a lot. And it makes sense given everything that's going on. But you have to remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and it takes sustained effort from all of us. Look at the civil rights movement or women's suffrage or the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. None of those things were easy. None of them happened quickly. But they happened because people kept fighting and they didn't give up.
So we need to be persistent,
Exactly.
even when it feels impossible.
Yeah, we can't afford to get cynical. We have to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.
Hopeful, that's a good word. It's easy to get dragged down by negativity, but it's important to remember that there are people out there fighting for a better world and that we can be a part of that fight.
You absolutely can. And you don't have to do everything at once. Find one thing that you're passionate about and focus on that. Even a small action, when enough people do it, can create real change.
I love that. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. Maybe a little scary at times, but also insightful. It seems like we're facing some real challenges, but we're not helpless. We have the power to make a difference.
We absolutely do. The future of our democracy really depends on it.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through all of this. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, knowledge is power and engagement is key. We'll see you next time.